Hello. Hello. Welcome, everyone. My name is Stuart Harris. I'm the COO at Milligan. This is the second annual conference that we've held in partnership with Completely Retail Marketplace, which has been welcomed by all of our members. And I'd like to extend thanks to Revo and, in particular, all of our hosts and panelists today. As many of you know, Revo is the membership organisation run by members for members. It's the only membership body representing both owners, occupiers, and professional consultancies in retail and leisure, property, and places. Revo supports over 350 organisations, as well as over 2,000 individuals who are engaged in the diverse world of retail and leisure, property, and placemaking. Revo supports the interests and values of the whole retail, leisure, and placemaking real estate community, and is the forum for its members to network, share experience, provoke thinking, particularly, and lead the evolution of the built environment. We invite you to also join us on some of our upcoming events. We have a study tour in Edinburgh on the 20th of October and a number planned for 2023. We've got Retail Destination Live also happening in 2023 in the spring, following the successful and reinvigorated Centre Managers Conference that took place in July this year. Please visit the events page on the Revo website for more information. Also, you can find out how you can join our growing community. Please scan the QR codes that are displayed on the rolling banners and Revo flyers, or talk to one of the Revo representatives. And just before I come on to today's sessions, I'd just like to say a couple of words about the Revo Educational Trust. Revo remains committed to professional education through the Revo Educational Trust and the Diploma in Retail and Leisure Place Management at Solent University. The fourth cohort is due to start the course from April 2023, and we would encourage you to include this in your staff development programs. The European Shopping Places Trust and Revo Educational Trust are providing part funding for a number of places, which is aimed at increasing the accessibility of professional education in the sector. So please do get involved. Today's panel sessions, we've got 3 panel sessions today covering a wide range of topical issues, from repurposing, measuring social value, and how we deliver generational change in our towns and cities. Session 1, which will begin shortly, is being led by Gina and Jonathan from Revo Hub, and is all about the role of repositioning assets in creating vibrant town centres, with contributions from Suk and Savills. Session 2 will be led by Vivian King, and it is all about the role of S in ESG. More specifically, the rise of responsible investing, and we've got some great panellists and contributions from the Good Economy, AEW, Schroders, British Land, Alandi, and Wedlake Bell. The third session, which I'll be hosting, will focus on regeneration and the role, and an important role, that the private and public sectors play in working in partnership. We've got contributions from Urban Splash, John Lewis, Legal in General, and Swansea City Council. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Gina, who's going to begin session 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stuart, and good afternoon, everyone. So let's get started. Firstly, who are Revo Hub? This is our lovely under 35s committee that Jonathan and I are members of. We have been having lots of conversations over the past year about the future of retail, and today's session will focus on town centre repurposing and regeneration. The session is split into 4 presentations. Between myself and Jonathan and John Hoyle from Suk, we'll look at different scales of opportunity, from full town centre vision to individual units, and considering the long, medium, and short-term timescales. Tom Whittington from Savills will then give us a roundup of the challenges we face going forward on an economic and environmental standpoint. So I'm going to talk from my experience of working on town centre visions as a way of making sense of what is a very complex subject and something that touches on every aspect of life. I'm really grateful to be able to speak to you today about things that I genuinely care about, and this example project was a pilot project in collaboration with the local authority and central government and Revo. And it really is the story of many, if not most, towns across the UK. In this project in Paisley, we're already seeing the positive impact of the vision in private investment and in community initiatives. And this led on to be government guidance on high street regeneration. I'm going to focus on 3 key ideas. So how did we get here? So understanding the past to understand how we can move forward. Putting people first. So how do we consider a wide variety of needs rather than just being led by market trends? And thinking big. This is about leadership and tackling systemic issues through master planning and visioning. What has been really useful is to get a picture of what happened over the last few decades to make sure we avoid the same mistakes in the future. So you can see here a map of Paisley pre-1990s, which was ancient history for us Hub Committee. And the red line shows the location of a future shopping centre. The colours you see show retail and other services in the town. All the street edges are active, so not just with retail, with civic services, banking, commercial, healthcare, education, and importantly, residential. There was low private car ownership, meaning that everything had to be accessible on foot and public transport, and the town centre met the needs of the whole community. As we move through the 1990s, we see retail really booming and becoming so in demand that it began pushing other uses out of the town centre. In fact, the demand was so great that staircases were often removed in high street stores to maximise footprint, to maximise floor space, and therefore there was no option to access upper floors or have mixed-use blocks. When all of this was not sufficient, we see the development of, in this case, a second town centre shopping centre in the backland space behind the main streets. This centre was built over 3 levels, and once fully let, it represented over 40% of the retail space in the town. And this was a massive increase in capacity. It pulled retail away from the streets and turned its back on the town centre. Public routes and permeability through the town were now privatised, and I think we all know a town where this has happened, where streets were turned into malls and it was all closed out of operating hours. So, with residential, workplace, leisure, healthcare, all pushed to the edge of town or out of town, and the significant investment that came with that, there was little incentive to return these uses to the town centre. Of course, this is all concurrent with a massive increase in car ownership and the introduction of a huge volume of out-of-town retail. So now we can see the lower quality retail spaces around the purpose-built shopping centre begin to fail. Older buildings, such as the historic department store, which was there for over a century, failed because the centre of gravity shifted slightly away from it. Here, the shopping centre is still doing well. It's got modern, large floor plates, and the rest of the town is suffering. But the writing is on the wall, as it was in many towns. Over the next decades, or the next 2 decades, we see the acceleration of universal changes in shopping habits, i.e. out of town and the internet. And the impact of this is significant failures within the highest quality retail spaces in the shopping centre and its anchors. So looking back, it's quite clear to see the total dominance of one use set itself up to fail. But even without competition from out-of-town retail, the lack of stewardship from local authorities was a key factor. This happened all across the UK, Local authorities didn't realise their responsibility to have a strategy for a sustainable town and simply left it to market forces. So now we know that we need many reasons to go to town centres and a mix of sectors that all work in a symbiotic relationship to each other. So the good news is that within the mistakes made, there is an embedded solution, i.e. the villain becomes the hero. Large shopping centre assets offer the right scale to kickstart whole town centre regeneration. In one bold move, we can massively impact and rebalance the uses within a town. Beyond just the scale, however, the ownership aspect is the key factor. The fragmented ownership of a traditional high street is a big challenge when you want to strategically rebalance a town, whereas shopping centres have a big critical mass under one ownership. So a catalyst project like this needs to be positioned within a wider vision in order to make that meaningful strategic change. So asset owners must look beyond their demises, work with local authorities and other stakeholders in order to make a collaborative vision happen. The visions must have substantial depth and quality to really engage and excite everyone and maintain that energy over decades, because we all know these things take a long time. So if we look a little bit closer at a catalyst project like this, just to say this is not pie in the sky, it is achievable. Here, as a result of the vision, a private investment vehicle purchased the centre and has taken this project forward to achieve planning status. So this will deliver new routes, quality urban spaces, it will deliver active ground floor with 100 residential units above, an 130-bed hotel, and 100,000 square foot of health and education space. And importantly, it pushes the remaining retail back onto the high street. Where possible, the structure of the pretty robust and modern shopping centre was repurposed. And while this can be challenging, it can bring lots of benefits as well in programme, cost, and the environment, which John and Tom will touch on a little bit as well. So we're starting to see the benefits of cultivating diverse and resilient town centres and focusing on meeting people's needs. And there are many great exemplars where we are getting it right. So I think that a major part of getting it right is putting people first, and through thorough engagement with local communities, we can learn from the source what they need and where. And this should capture a cross-section of society, so from school children all the way through to seniors, local politicians, key institutions and business owners. For Paisley, we had a series of focus sessions and we asked participants direct questions about imagining the future of their town. We recorded these places, experiences and opportunities that were put forward and looked at the whole town centre together to see where we could accommodate them. Some of the key interventions are highlighted here. So here we can see the historic cinema facade that currently functions as the entrance to the shopping centre. This will be retained and repurposed as a gateway into the mixed-use catalyst development that we saw previously, allowing people to live in the town centre and create a busy, walkable neighbourhood. We focused on poor quality buildings that have a detrimental impact on people's impression of their town. Here, opening up a key view that was lost in the town, which created development frontage for residential and active frontage for independent and experience-focused retailers. This is another poor quality building fronting a main square. Here, the full structure is retained and repurposed with only the facade replaced. The bones of this building become a digital skills academy and a cinema. So this is developed and owned by the Community Trust. And this returns a lost communal experience to what also was a former cinema site on the high street. So, thinking big. All of this is well and good, but why does it really matter? In the particular landscape that we find ourselves in, I think we have the opportunity to use master planning as a force for good, a way to tackle complex systemic issues such as social isolation, inequality, and the climate emergency. This was exactly the topic of the first in-person Revo seminar after the pandemic, where the theme was fixing towns for good, so for longevity and for social benefit. One study that gave us a deeper understanding of people's needs was to map the imagined projects from the community engagement. So we broke this down into the different social groups: families with children, teenagers, young adults, and seniors. And the feedback from our clients was that this was one of the strongest parts of the project because it highlighted the importance of putting different groups' needs and putting people into the story. So when we overlay all of these, we can see where community truly happens and where we can most effectively restart the economic engine of the high street. So I'm going to finish off by highlighting two trends from my direct experience where I think we can have real societal impact. The first is local workplace, and this is based on research from a winning BCO competition entry. So today, blended working is becoming the norm, which is great for town centres. It brings activity and footfall, but there are still some drawbacks from working from home completely in social and practical sense. So if large employers downscaled their city centre premises in exchange for strategic peripheral town centre locations, for example, we can create lots of opportunities. Career possibilities are much more visible to teenagers and young people who might never see inside a large city centre office. Younger children can safely drop in after school, meet their parents, do their homework. And for working women, there are huge benefits. Globally, women provide around 75% of unpaid care work, and this could be for their children or for other relatives. And the value of this work has been estimated between 77 billion and, in a recent article, up to 380 billion pounds per year in the UK. And this work takes time, often impacting women's daily travel patterns. So rather than twice daily commute into the city, we see women making multiple chain journeys throughout the day. So the ability to split their working week between home, a local hub, and the city means that it works really well and fits in with the 20-minute neighbourhood concept. This type of intervention ensures that women are not excluded from more prestigious city centre jobs just because they don't have the time to commute every day, which is an obvious benefit to all of society, of course, alongside a fair split of care work. Not only is there a major carbon saving from reducing commutes into the city, there is a major barrier removed for people with physical disabilities. So inner city public transport is still widely inaccessible, with the prime example being the underground. So having local workplaces means that businesses also are not losing out on talent just because it's inaccessible to reach their premises. And this is the kind of joined up thinking that we need to fix our towns for good. Another key trend I'm working on is bringing healthcare back to the high street. In a post-pandemic world, it is key to free up hospitals and provide outpatient and community care in the town centre. This will reduce cross-contamination between seriously ill and community patients. Not only that, but it brings substantial footfall to the town centre and benefits the full ecosystem of businesses based there. So some of the projects I'm really fortunate to be involved in are bringing healthcare into vacant retail space. One example is in a shopping centre, another in a former Debenhams store. The diagram here shows 37,500 square foot of health centre in Kent. And clearly, the repurposing of retail to healthcare has a massive benefit in support of an accessible, multi-generational town centre community. So we've looked at how we got here, putting people first and thinking big. So from my experience so far, I think there is a greater understanding that solutions driven by measurable social value, health and well-being, and carbon reduction are not only viable, but they are now the only answer. And that's a future I'm really excited about. So thank you very much, and I'll pass over to Jonathan.
Hi there, yes, I'm Jonathan Jones from Chapman Taylor Architects, and also a member of the Revo Hub committee. And today I'll be talking about some of the design challenges when repurposing redundant shopping spaces, including department stores and shopping centres, with a particular focus on our town centres. I think we all recognise that there's an over-provision of retail space, and something needs to happen. Landlords need to be proactive or face the daunting prospect of becoming irrelevant. Chapman Taylor have been fortunate enough to work with a number of significant clients to develop alternative solutions for these spaces. And this is an opportunity for us to kind of go through some of the outcomes of our design research. The need for intervention, accelerated by the pandemic, has been driven by the online challenge, giving consumers convenience at a low cost. The cost of maintaining a physical retail presence can put physical retailers at a disadvantage. And broadly speaking, retail environments have been static, lacking investment and adaptation that's key to staying relevant. I think mono-use retail is too limiting, and to combat that, we need to understand how to consolidate, compress, and diversify retail. If you think about the characteristics of retail space, it's very much a blank canvas, a facilitating space with a typical frontage, depth, and width. And it's trying to understand what other uses can easily use that space and animate the streets for longevity. Understanding viability and value are really important to this. Changes in market costs for construction costs and asset value, as well as regional differences in value, are all really important. In many instances, the development process can take years, if not decades, so having an idea about the short-term aspirations as well as the long-term vision is really important. So we need that conversation between asset managers and development managers as well. And with all instances, local authority support is really key, particularly in UK town centres with fragmented ownership. CPOs and government funding will go a long way to turning a concept into a reality. I'll just quickly run through some of the common design considerations we come up against on projects like these. And the first one is site and how an existing building has or hasn't responded to its urban context in terms of the historic street pattern, in terms of the scale of urban blocks, as well as key place markers as well. You know, how well has an existing building responded to its local environment? It's important to recognise we've got quite a range of shopping spaces across the UK. We've got a number of post-war shopping precincts that have evolved, taking influence from the North American mall, an air-conditioned, enclosed space, very much surrounded by a surface car parking. And it's very much about how can I drive to a centre like this rather than how can I access it as a pedestrian. The example on screen is a sort of dumbbell arrangement with two anchors and a run of shops between. And it's really important to understand that model and how it's been taken into UK town centres and potentially compromised with poor legibility. And there's a dependency between the different units. If you take a unit out, that's going to have an immediate impact on the way the whole building works as a building diagram. This formulaic approach combined with brand multiples has led to clone town syndrome, where the character of a space is led by the brand rather than the city itself. This is an example of a shopping centre in Bristol that's very much landed like a spaceship, ignoring its context, and these poor residents have a brick wall to look at. When we talk about inward-looking centres, you have to consider the back-of-house spaces as well. How does the servicing work? How do you unpick that? And these spaces are often unwelcoming spaces with poor surveillance. Department stores are designed with prominence, and as a benefit with historic department stores, you've got fantastic character to work with the space. But you also have some restrictions with that as well in terms of how you can manipulate the facade. You've got floor-to-floor heights to consider, window openings, as well as trying to retrofit modern regulations into that in terms of means of escape, fire protection, sustainable credentials, which can be a challenge. Of course, some retail centres are operating better than others, and it's always worth understanding what is working and building on that when we're looking at these sort of places. So, retail is important. It still is a significant element, but it's about understanding how can we diversify retail? What will complement retail as a solution to this? We've seen a growth in local and independent retailers with facts from the LDC, moving towards a traditional high street model of your butcher, baker, and candlestick maker, if you will, as well as hyper-locality. What can I walk to within 15 minutes from where I live? Can I access a hardware store, a cycle store, health store, or a local vets, for example? Trinity Kitchens is an archetype for bringing in a casual street food offer into a shopping centre, and it's become a destination in its own right. And leisure uses are a really useful tool in your arsenal, making use of some of those awkward spaces. They often require similar spaces as big box retail. Gravity in Wandsworth was able to adapt large department store floor plates and introduce competitive socializing into the space. Bear with me, technical difficulties. I think to bring that vibrancy back into our town centres, we need to re-establish urban living and the quality of urban living. With the pandemic that we've all experienced, understanding access to outside space, amenities, a sense of community is hugely important. And other uses like hospitality, student living, it's understanding how you can retrofit these uses into spaces or where a new build solution needs to be the way forward. This example of a retrofitted space in a 1876 department store in Brixton, it brings in a 9-to-5 population. Workspace itself has evolved. It's about co-working spaces and flexible spaces. The space requirements is increasing. And in a building like this, it's about understanding how do you bring in the access arrangements that you need. If you've got multiple uses and you need multiple access cores running through the building, that's going to eat away that footprint. And again, it's a similar story with education. This department store conversion in Gloucester into a higher educational institute is a really good example of how that's been done. Meanwhile, uses are really important as a community test bed to provide a continuity of activity whilst larger leasing conversations are taking place. But it also taps into what does the community actually need. Peckham Levels is a great example of a shopping centre multi-level car park that's been repurposed into a social enterprise space for local artists and entrepreneurs. And green space, when we talk about green space, it's about the value that can bring to a centre. This is quite a bold scheme in Stockton where the shopping centre has actually been demolished in favour of green space. And actually it's about improving the value around and the adjacent values. Again, local authority support is hugely important here. Another similar bold scheme is Broadmarsh, where the skeleton of the existing shopping centre has been left intact, but it's been animated by performance, creating a destination, a vibrant location with a unique selling point. So as a bit of a summary, I think there's always something that we can do to improve the space. And understanding the incremental approach to achieve a large-scale strategic vision is really important, whether that's a light intervention, an ergonomic approach, how does a person interact with the space? And that might be wayfinding, improving dwell time, getting the right mix of tenants into a space. Then it's about trying to understand where are the easy wins, how can I start to introduce a mix of uses to start to complement and diversify the building. And finally, it's a full master planning approach, a blank slate approach that retains the essential elements but creates a really vibrant development. So in summary, it's about understanding the building. It's about trying to compress retail and create the right kind of tenants in a space. What is working, building upon that, and turning many inward-looking centres to look outwards, and that's bringing in nature. That's also responding to the sense of place and making a connection to the cities themselves, and understanding what are the incremental steps to achieve that. Great, thank you. I'll pass on to John Hoyle from Sook.
Hello everyone, I'm John, I'm the CEO and founder of Sook, and what Sook does is rent spaces by the hour to all sorts of different occupiers across 100 plus hours of the week. What I want to do today is challenge some of the norms about how we engage with occupiers, because there isn't an asset manager in the UK at the moment who isn't worried about having excess loss-leading space. And what I believe is that by looking at a slightly different business model, you can actually drive more revenue at the same time as embracing a whole new ecosystem of brands that have never been in your assets before. As a former landlord, I'm not one of those people who bashes landlords and blames them for where we are today, but I do think it's worth us all looking at ourselves and the way that we do business, considering whether it's always the most accessible way to bring the people that we want into our assets into a contractual engagement. So what Sook does is it's building a portfolio of assets. We have 11 to date, which rent space by the hour. We drive about 3 times more income than a headline rent and allow you to do all sorts of different things at different hours of the week across approximately 100 hours of that week. It's all based on a reaction to the fact that nobody needs a shop 7 days a week. We're in a world of agility and flexibility. With the economic headwinds that we're facing now, no one wants to make a bet for even 5 years, let alone 10. And therefore, that customer base that we've all become accustomed to in terms of long-term leases is being eroded. We, as an asset class, need to think differently about how we can incorporate all sorts of different occupiers, and not just retailers. What traditionally has happened is that we have searched for bankable occupiers across all of our spaces. We're looking for a 10-year lease, a strong covenant strength. We all know the kind of dream deal that an asset manager wants to land, and it's very much supported by our very mature sector that's grown with multiple layers, all supporting this goal of relatively risk-free income. But what that does is it cuts out a whole spectrum of potential occupancy that just can't afford to take that risk, doesn't have the money, doesn't have the know-how, but more than that, has become accustomed to retailing in a totally new environment, which is online. They expect agility. They expect data-led analytics to understand what's working or not. They don't expect to sit in a space for a decade hoping that a bet they made at the beginning of that term is going to still generate the same level of revenue at the end of that term. The days of the upwards-only rent review, as we all, I'm sure, acknowledge, are coming to an end. And by being more flexible, we can embrace a new generation of occupiers and create more revenue in the tens of thousands of empty assets that are lying across our space. We don't need to build new shops. We just need to find a way of making them accessible for all sorts of other people. So by creating an hourly model, even though I'm sure some of you are thinking, how on earth can that work logistically? You can embrace a totally different occupier on a Monday morning to what you would have on a Saturday afternoon. And you can still drive viability by pricing your weekends at the same cost as renting an entire week through a traditional lease. It's worth paying that premium for a brand because it cuts you out of all of the normal fixed costs that you'd have in the other 5 days of the week where your brand isn't selling anything or achieving any of the goals it set out for. A fractional leasing model drives more revenue, but also appeals to customers much more. And by having a series of events or lateral occupancy with different brands at the right times of the week for the right customers, you are driving much more consistent footfall rather than the peaks of troughs that are also the bane of so many assets throughout the nation. And you can serve the communities in which these spaces are set in a much more effective way than just having a fashion retailer that is, to all intents and purposes, an empty shop on a Monday through to a Thursday. And that's what Souk does, working with some of the biggest asset managers already in the UK, but also some of the biggest brands. When I took a punt and set up this business, it was all basically begging landlords to take a chance on us so that we could prove that there was a revenue model that existed. And I'm pleased to say we're doing that. As I say, generating 3 times more revenue than a headline rent in nearly all of our stores. And that's working with some of the biggest brands in the world too. We've unlocked access to an entire spectrum of occupancy that just didn't exist before. And I'll tell you a bit more about some of the most exciting ones in a second. What's awesome about that is that you can de-risk the financial viability of a Souk unit in your portfolio with a big brand, and then you can charge appropriately for all sorts of other community-led occupiers the rest of the week. And all of that adds up to something really interesting. We could probably hang our entire business model on the event-led occupiers after 6 p.m. It's a totally different way of thinking about how to manage your assets in terms of time and not space. So, how does it work? Well, we are essentially a massive device. You can put it into any space, and using Canva, which is a big Australian Photoshop unicorn, you can deploy whatever content you want onto the walls. You can pick your furniture, you can pick your audio, you can even pick your lighting solution, you can book staff, you can send stock for a fulfillment solution that happens out back, and you turn up to take part in your hourly focused Souk to achieve whatever goals you want, and it is ready to go, looking amazing. We provide a full analytics solution that allows you to see exactly how you've performed and decide whether you want to do it again or try somewhere else. And this is a video of our Edinburgh site in St James's Quarter for those of you who have been. It is a huge modular solution that can insert into any space. Rear loading is preferable for the back of house element to roll people's fit out into play when their time comes. You can mock this up in any way you choose, using Canva as I've mentioned. But what's key about this fit out is it can be moved around. It doesn't need to be site specific. If an asset manager does find that dream 10-year lease, the Souk can be moved to one of the other assets, and we all have vacancy right now. And that leads to kind of totally different kind of occupiers. This is a Belgian Depopper, and I'll talk more about Depop in a second, who's a regular customer coming for a matter of hours, making about 3 to 5 times ROI on her hourly cost, and driving her own footfall using social media. But it works for big brands too. I just seem to have jumped a video, but this is Radley in that same space with a bespoke fit out, selling obviously women's accessories over a slightly longer time frame in a completely different way to how they would normally use physical space. Oh, here is that video. It's just in reverse order. And we're opening sites rapidly. Last week we opened Birmingham, Southampton, Leeds. We opened Shoreditch. Next week, there is a huge drive. We can't keep up with customer demand now for these spaces that all sorts of different occupiers can use in a completely different way to what we're all used to. Here's some of the brands that are coming in the next few months. And these are the big brand ones. I just want to talk about Depop for a second. I didn't know what Depop was when I started Souk. I'm sure there are people in this room that don't know what Depop is. You should find out about Depop. It is a fashion revolution that is driving huge amounts of potential occupiers into physical space, bought by Etsy for £1.3 billion last year. They are a really interesting case study in how the high street's changing. We are, as a retail sector, got a really unhappy workforce. Only the mining sector is more unhappy than retail workers, which is pretty sad. So why would you become an employee at Next these days if you can set up your own business at Depop? And there's this sort of fallacy that Gen Z are idle. They're not idle. They've just got different choices, and they want to go direct to their own customers rather than working for someone else. If we collectively don't recognize that change, that generational shift that just didn't exist in any of our generations, I'm guessing, looking at the audience, then we will miss a trick for what is going to happen in the future of our high streets. And as you can see from this slide, it's a really interesting blend in those big brands that want different hours, pay different levels, but it's everything from music. So we launched a band that I'd never heard of because I'm not cool or trendy enough at the weekend, called D Group. They was just selling merch, no artists in place at all, and have sold out the O2 for 2 nights just from having a space. Jägermeister, never going to have a shop permanently, but have got customers throughout the country that they want to engage with in an agile way. But it's about much more than these big brands. They pay the bills, and it's so important that we embrace them for the financial health and the future of our high streets. But where I get really excited is about all of the other brands. We've talked a lot about the importance of embracing community, but the reality is community doesn't have a covenant strength, and it doesn't have that much money. It can't drive a really sustainable economic solution in a real estate asset, even a provincial one where rents are low. So it needs to be blended with all sorts of other uses, and that's what we're doing, driving high-value retail hours with big brands, and then embracing all sorts of other random uses. And this isn't a great example of that, actually, because this is a Premier League footballer called Alan St-Maximin in our Metro Centre site, selling headbands to Geordies. Now, as random as that sounds, Geordies are not the most affluent demographic in our country, but he sold 300 headbands in an hour and a half and made £25,000, which he promptly reinvested into a toy shop next door for some reason to garner popularity with that fan base. The subscription brands of online are another rich pool of occupancy for us. So blending online retail with physical retail is really powerful, particularly the subscription model. And these guys have customers everywhere. This particular example, Freddy's Flowers, are, as it would sound, a subscription-based flower provision service. They want to capture a customer through IRL engagement, and then they keep them for a year or so. Driving the halo effect of online is something I think we need to get much better as a sector about doing, because there's no substitute for real-life engagement, but the reality is people still want to make purchases online. We just need to stop fighting the online surge and start embracing it. And events are key. They are really popular wherever you are in the UK. As I say, most shops are closed at 6. Why aren't we using those latent spaces to engage with community and drive really awesome activations? You've got a £100,000 digital tool to make look amazing, and it drives all sorts of random stuff from reggae aerobics, which is basically twerking, to salsa, to Depop sellers again, Uber activations, makeup, all sorts of completely different elements that are key to the community and drive footfall that spends in other nearby adjacencies at random times of the week, not leaving just a peak and trough model across that week. Launch parties are big for us, and I think that's, again, key for the agility piece. There are customers for online brands everywhere, doing a lot of work with the big social media guys such as TikTok. Their customers are everywhere. It doesn't need to be a prime retail area. At the moment, we've got no idea, really, as a sector, whether the future of physical retail sits in a prime London type scenario, or it sits provincially. With the future of work completely up in the air, being able to be agile and drive retail into all sorts of new locations is key. And I dare say we will see particular suburban towns starting to be more desirable for retail than the centre of London is today. And just a few more examples across food and drink, amenity, launch, and even charity. The lady you can see on the left-hand side is a TikToker with 16 million followers. She wanted to raise money because she was upset that Joe Biden had withdrawn from Afghanistan. I mean, this is how kind of random the usage gets. She, with 4 days' notice, launched it with that much following. We had to be extremely careful because 0.1% of her following turns up, and we've essentially got a protest on the street. She had a huge activation. It drove enormous amounts of footfall, and then she moved on. But you don't have to have millions of followers. The guys on the right did it with a collection of just 20,000 followers, again, bringing our Oxford Street space to a standstill. And then other pieces, just to talk about, that we do a bad job of embracing because they don't pay the bills, is things like art. You know, NFTs are really prevalent now, and doing things like digitally is excellent, but art has really strong community value. There are artists in every community, and people want to see amazing art and potentially buy it. It has a high price point and drives a strong ROI around physical activations, and we should do a better job of embracing it. Final piece is just around health, wellness, fitness. It really upsets me that most shops are closed until 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. Why can't they be used for yoga, Pilates, something that focuses around giving the community what they need and doing it on a national level? It's something that we're blending with big brands who want to reach the authenticity of local customers and local service providers, local instructors. And we think that's really big for the future, including embracing children. You know, children and old people are in our retail centres at different times and have completely different needs. Let's address that with an hourly rental model. Beauty, huge at the moment. There are more, the only resurgence we're seeing in our high streets at the moment is from hair and beauty brands. We need to embrace that better, and the move towards self-employment in that sector, again, a bit like the Gen Zs, is vast. We need to support these guys, and they bring a large following of locally, which is great for all of our assets. Workshops have been a huge thing for us. TikTok activation was all about just creating content. And there's TikTokers everywhere. You can see them on the streets in all of your local towns, and TikTok want to engage in all sorts of different ways. I've talked about NFTs, so we'll just push towards community. And one of the things that we're working on with some of the biggest brands is supporting those local brands. They're prepared to pay a premium to reach local customers in provincial locations. They'll pay a London price to be in the metro centre, as you can see there with MasterCard. And that's a great way of driving the business case that is key to supporting everything that we do in all of these shops. I'm sure you've seen enough examples now, so I'll just get through to the end and finish off. Last piece about Depoppers. I mean, I couldn't have imagined setting up a business when I was 20. We're now seeing such a strong surge in activity, it's almost one of our biggest income streams. This is 20-year-old girls, in the most case, driving their own footfall using their social media following. That was unimaginable and is 10 years ago, and is now challenging the dominance of some of the more established brands that we've worked with so far. That combined with things like live streaming in real life, driving a huge uplift in GMV, and the agility that this provides to grow a brand without the headache of physical space. Because remember, really, occupiers don't like landlords, is the sad reality. They don't want to engage with them. They want something that's simple, straightforward, clear, and in their favour. And as a sector, we need to get much better at addressing that. Just to show you how the progression from TikTok has worked, from live streaming to content creation to the next stage of Souk, which is actually anchoring live streaming with large social media brands across the country and beyond. So thanks for listening. I hope that's provoked some thoughts about different ways of engaging with occupiers and doing it in a way that is profitable, purpose-led, and good for communities. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Tom Whittington. Now, the future of good investment in retail places is about building resilience. So, what makes retail places resilient? And it's in their ability to adapt, but how should they be adaptable? And it's their ability to provide a range of goods and services, but what should they provide? And it's in their ability to provide clean spaces that minimize the impact on the natural world and its resources. But how do we go about doing that, and what's the cost? I'd like to unravel economic and environmental sustainability for a few moments, to rethink how we give places purpose, and to think about how the repurposing and repositioning agenda have a goal to play in delivering these elements. So first, let's have a look at economic sustainability, very briefly. Now, it's been talked about already. We have too much space. Not all places are affected equally, but most places have to face the realities of the challenge ahead. We have 150 million square feet of retail voids nationally, and 40% of those are long-term empty, arguably redundant. And by the end of the decade, we could be in a position where 300 million square feet of retail space is no longer required for retail. That's the do-nothing situation. It doesn't have to be that way, and hopefully we can offer a solution to that. Now, I'm not going to stand here today and say that retail is dead. Far from it. But it needs to be relevant. We have fit-for-purpose retail parks and leisure schemes that have zero vacancy. And at the other end of the scale, we have shopping centres that have closed their doors for good. And then in between, we have a whole myriad of different retail places up and down the country that, frankly, all of them need to be perfected in some way. But what needs to be done to them? How often do we ask, what do communities actually want here? And how often do we develop or lease space that we think is right, but do we actually know? And how often do we assign value to those places through yields or ERV, or should it be through consumer activity? Like it or not, when it comes to town centres and high streets, it's not this that consumers want or need. And it's probably not this. It's more likely to be this. The future is hybrid. Give people more reason to use their town centres and retail places, and you build affinity, loyalty, community, and retail demand. And this will be the key to future of retail occupation. Mixed uses benefit all uses. They interlink footfall, cross-pollinate footfall, they create different journeys, use different day parts, and the potential to make places that are more vibrant, have greater social value, they're more resilient, and they're ultimately more sustainable. There are lots of really good examples of where repurposing has started to bring together all of these uses. Some of them have been touched again already today. What are the benefits? Well, we know that there's very little occupational demand for the largest retail units, but there is demand for large spaces in retail places, if you can make it work. Alternative uses can bring diverse income. That builds resilience. It can create longer leases, and that builds stability. Flexible occupation creates a point of difference. Imaginative spaces build engagement. All of these increase the demand on the retail space that's remaining. Let's have a bit of a reality check, however, because we've been looking at repurposing for a number of years, and there's still relatively few developments that have actually come off the ground. Savills is working with about 100 projects at the moment, and they're ongoing. And there are definitely mixed fortunes. The example on the screen is a really good example of one that has made it through. It's St Enoch's in Glasgow. They've repurposed the department store to offices, and they've repurposed or repositioned some of the retail to an increased amount of F&B and leisure. But so many other schemes are just taking that a little bit longer. And why is that? Well, development takes time. Funding and viability are undoubtedly problematic. Construction costs are really proving a strangle at the moment. And planning is not without its delays, and in some cases, if we think about what's happening on Oxford Street, can be controversial. But we're still not dealing with actually the places that need our help most, and that's the fragmented, marginalised stock, the fragmented ownership stock that's on all of our high streets up and down the country. But despite these challenges, repurposing is here to stay, and it's on its way. Now, let's take a look at environmental sustainability of retail places. COP, consumers, ESG, and policy are all driving this movement. Now, yesterday, very excited that Savills released our latest publication on reimagining retail. It's been 9 months in the process, and it's all about a deep dive into what retail property will need to go to become green. It's been a fascinating journey of discovery to be involved in, and I'm just going to share some of the sort of the key top-level pieces for you now, because I think they're relevant to the overall topic that we're talking about. First of all, there are a number of facts that we need to think about. 40% of the global carbon emissions are from the built environment. In 2020, the man-made materials exceeded the biomass of the natural world for the first time. The fashion industry accounts for 10% of global emissions and 20% of all water pollution. And then closer to home, 215 million tons of carbon dioxide are emitted for the products that we buy every year. And shops account for 17% of domestic building emissions. Now, we have to accept as an industry that we have a collective responsibility, but I think we also have a collective contribution in resolving these issues and moving things forwards. Looking at where urgent change is needed, let's have a look for a moment at EPCs. The performance certification regulations are essentially providing a bit of a cliff edge for us in retail property right at this point in time. Because by next year, 185 million square feet of UK retail floor space can no longer be leased, unless it's urgently and rapidly improved. But that's nothing, because by 2030, the regulations tighten again, and 1.4 billion square feet of UK retail floor space, 83% of stock, needs to be improved in the next 7 years, or we risk losing a significant proportion of our shops. There are all sorts of nuances around this, which you can read in our publication, but I won't go into now. Now, the key thing that's concerning me, that we can sort this out as an industry of major retail parks and shopping centres, but that high street stock, that marginalised, fragmented ownership, they're at risk of being forgotten and left behind. And guess what? That's exactly the same stock that we were talking about earlier in terms of where the biggest occupational challenges exist. Now, for many landlords, EPCs are seen as somewhat of a distraction against other economic and environmental improvements that could arguably be more effectively implemented into their retail places. And there are a whole tranche of other measures that landlords and retailers are undertaking in terms of cleaning their stores and their supply chains. Too often, the economics has hindered the undertaking environmental improvements. But this is rapidly changing. And this is where it starts to get really interesting when we think about the topic of an opportunity of retail repurposing. There's a growing realization that we need to weigh up the financial cost of action with the financial burden of inaction. Investors are increasingly seeking more sustainable stock and, obviously, that with the best occupational standards. The two go hand in hand. We often talk about the elusive green premium, but actually the problem is probably more about stranded stock and the brown discount. There's a clear correlation between occupationally and environmentally challenged locations when it comes to investment values. We cannot and we must not lead regeneration through an economic lens alone. This is not what consumers or investors or stakeholders are going to want going forwards. It's about connected priorities. And when we repurpose retail or redevelop our town centres, we have the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. One example of this is with the circular economy. If you've not heard of it, this is going to be one of the fundamental principles that defines the next generation for the retail industry and much wider in terms of the economic environment. This will include the life cycle of the products that we buy. It will include the carbon embodied within the buildings that the properties that we build, but it also includes how we use these buildings. Retail spaces as we know them need to be flexible, agile spaces that are adaptable to different uses, as we've talked about already. That in itself builds in resilience to changing occupational trends, and it reduces the lifetime carbon of those spaces, and it reduces customer journeys because there's more reasons to visit and minimize the number of journeys that we need to make. It's about giving places purpose. So if we take the Funan Mall in Singapore as an example, low carbon design and construction, mixed uses that include retail, leisure, workspace, residential, community, sustainable transport, green roofs, urban food production, and lots of other besides. And mixed uses in a community mean for reduced journeys, improved biodiversity, better wellness, and social value. And there's good evidence to suggest that when we regenerate our places through a green lens, we make them better places altogether that build pride and loyalty from the people who use them. None of this is easy, of course, and it takes time. It's no surprise that when we talk about some of the most progressive town centre redevelopments that we see in this country at the moment, that we're talking about local authority, ownership, partnership, and stewardship. Who would have thought 10 years ago that we might be turning this into this? Borrowing a slide from Jonathan. You've got to applaud the bravery of Stockton-upon-Tees for being bold enough to knock down a failed shopping centre and build a public park. It's all very well us talking about the importance of alternative uses and more people living and working in town centres. But why would they in the current state of some of those places? Improve the environment and social impacts, social aspects of any place, and you've got the potential to draw people back, and then the economic recovery can start. And that's just as relevant for small retail schemes as it is for large town centres. There are headwinds, of course. I think retail has pretty much been facing headwinds since the GFC in many ways, but of course the last couple of years have been particularly problematic. And those headwinds aren't going away. Now, as an industry, we often have our heads down navigating those clear and present challenges. We need to spend more time thinking about the long-term change and how we're going to get there. The future for good investment in retail places is in recognizing that economic and environmental sustainability are not two disparate goals. They're two sides of the same coin. Those places that embrace both objectives will be in turn embraced by the communities and consumers, and that in turn is a sound economic policy for the stakeholders of those retail properties. For more into these insights, please do read our latest publication. It is a genuine cross-industry collaboration, so I don't feel too bad about doing a direct plug. And on the 13th of October, we've got a webinar, so please join us for that conversation. Thank you very much.